Hello and welcome to the Movie Moolah Podcast special spooky season edition. My name is Ben Yenny, and with me today is Jason Ragosta, who is the project lead, I guess is the best way to say it, on Sinphony, which is now on Screenbox, and as well as a great many other things that we'll get into over the course of this podcast. Jason, how are you today?
Doing great. Yeah. I was actually a writer, director, producer on Sinphony. I wouldn't necessarily want to misrepresent myself as being the lead of it. It was headed up by Michael Gavin and Sebastian Bazille, who are executive producers, and it was actually Sebastian's idea in the first place, and his dream that put it all together. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey from when it began to now.
Yeah, so for those of you listening who don't know, and the reason I was not entirely sure how to introduce Jason here is that the Sinphony is a really once in a blue moon, once in a decade maybe, sort of film, and that it's a widely released and pretty successful anthology, which is not the norm with anthologies. Could you tell us a little bit about how Sinphony came to be?
Yeah. So, back when when COVID hit, and everybody was locked up in their houses, at the time, I was actually being repped by Mutiny on ZTV, and I was working very closely with Colleen Butler, and she told me, she was like, Ben said that you need to get on this app called Clubhouse, and she was the one that actually invited me onto it. I'm pretty sure you invited her onto it. And so I went on Clubhouse and I started meeting people from around the world that were filmmakers. And one of the rooms I ended up in at like 5 a.m. one night was this anthology room with all these people. And they're like, "Oh, Jason, you're going to do this with us, right?" And I'm like, "What are we doing?" And it was, everybody was talking about how much they loved horror films, like, like John Carpenter and Carrie and, like, Halloween, all the classics. And then Sebastian Bazille, who was in the room, he was like, "All right, well, let's make a horror anthology." And we were all like, "Yeah, okay, we'll do that, sure." And he's like, "Send me scripts." So we, 2 days later, I sent a script in. Everybody else sent scripts in. I think the fastest one was my buddy Hank Pena. I think he got one into him within like 4 hours or something. And that was the thing that convinced Sebastian that it was serious, that it was real, because he read it and he dug it. And he was like, "Okay, maybe this will be a thing." And what was interesting about it is that every point along the way, it just came down to us as the filmmakers keeping up or like exceeding expectations with each stage. And then Sebastian and Mike, also meeting us every time and pushing things. So what ended up happening is we got our scripts in within that first week. We had a kind of writer's room meeting like a week later, and then basically we signed contracts. We each got a little bit of money to make our shorts. Sebastian and Mike actually came out to San Francisco and was on set with us, which was amazing for our shoot for our segment Mother Love, which is the one with the creepy clown mask and the mom covered in blood from the trailer. And yeah, and then what's crazy is like seven months later from our initial room, we had a finished feature film. And the amazing thing about it was, Michael Gavin, who is one of our executive producers, he's a longtime editor, and he worked a lot with NBC on different shows and all this other stuff, or like different channels. I'm not sure if NBC was the only one or even the correct one. But he edited the whole thing together. He also edited an amazing trailer together for us, which I think was a huge part in its success. Early on, we got onto Fangoria's radar. And what was cool is Jason Wilkinson and Mark Pritchard, two of our writer directors, they shot right away. They were raring to go. Like as soon as they had the money, I think they shot within like 2 to 4 weeks of like just like that initial time, and so they already had stills from their shorts at the time that Fangoria ran the first article on us. And I had illustrated the first poster for Sinphony, which was the cello with the skull. It was like a skeleton cello thing with flames. So we had some pretty cool visuals in that first article. And then the next article that came out from Fangoria had our trailer on it, which, everybody was like, oh my God, this might actually be good. And then after that, I did the more final poster, which everybody knows now that's seen it, that's used for the thumbnails and everything. And then I did a series of posters that was also featured in Fangoria, one for each of the shorts, because there's, I think I did 10 posters total for it, which was pretty cool. And I think the whole thing came down to, like, we were working with such amazing people. All of them were so committed to the project, and we just wanted to make it special. And I think, if you don't take the extra time to make it special and put it out there and make it like look like something that people will want to watch, then it can get left behind or not noticed.
Totally. Yeah. No, I mean, it's amazing how much of an impact the trailer and the key art tend to have on any sort of release, but particularly on something like an anthology. I get asked about anthologies all the time. I have several DVDs of random short film anthologies that are still sitting on my desk, and I haven't yet watched, and frankly might not at this point. But one of the biggest differentiators that I've seen from Sinphony is the quality of your assets, because it changes the feel of it dramatically. And yeah, so how did you end if you're were you involved in the distribution of this at all?
I wasn't involved. Basically, Mike and Seb made a deal with MPI, and then Dark Sky, their horror arm, handled the distribution on it. As far as I understand it, I did get to work with the PR team. I would generated a lot of assets and stuff working with them and their people, and that was very cool. And we brought it to a couple festivals. We were at the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival, and then we were also at the Nightmares. I believe it was the Nightmares Film Festival. Nightmares Film Festival and the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival. Yeah, which was an amazing experience. It was like there were a lot of like really cool films there. We were also there with I think VHS 99 was there around the same time, and then Moorhead and Benson's Something in the Dirt, I think, was there at the same time. It was just kind of like this like that was part of it, is that on Clubhouse we were kind of tapped into the horror community too. Like that was part of, I think, what made it as big as it was as well, just the awareness. Because like one of the things that happened too earlier on, because we released last October, which was amazing. We had a Halloween release, which meant we were listed in articles of like the anticipated films with like the menu, and like it was crazy, like the kind of coverage that we got. But a year before that, or like I guess months, in November, we had gotten to go and do a panel on Sinphony at Comic-Con, special edition, which was amazing. I had submitted us for that with Mike and Seb's permission, and we were able to set it up. And Jed Shepard, who was the writer on Host and Dashcam, was our moderator, which was amazing. And then we went to the Landmark Theater in LA after that, and we had a screening very early on, but it was like 100 of like horror, like horror industry people, and it was amazing. There were all these directors and producers and classic like scream queens and stars that were there, and it was really just an extraordinary experience, and people loved the film. So, I think that helped kind of seed everything to where, you know, Sinphony, it's just such a strange creature. Every filmmaker that was in it kind of attacked horror in a totally different way, too. Some of them are funny, some of
Mhm.
them are more straight horror. And they're just like, it's just this really weird, interesting, different kind of project than what you normally get from these kinds of
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, no, that makes having that much attention early on is very much a game changer for
Yeah,
any film.
absolutely.
Um, and Screenbox is pretty decent placement.
It's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even ignoring the fact it's an anthology, Screenbox is pretty decent placement. It's not the I would take a Shutter deal over that by a decent margin, but Screenbox is nothing to scoff at. It's a little bit like, would you prefer a New York strip with your lobster or the fillet with your lobster at a certain point?
The thing
Um,
that I will say about Screenbox though is
mhm,
it's highly curated. Oh,
mhm.
sorry, my cat just ran right through my shot there. It's a black cat, fits for Halloween. Um, but yeah, like the cool thing about Screenbox is like, they're like affiliated with Bloody Disgusting, and like the
Mhm.
curation is really high. So like when you look at the films that are on there, they're looking for like hardcore, like indie horror and classic horror projects
Mhm.
that are like that they've taken an interest in, because we got covered by Bloody Disgusting as well. Actually, a clip from my short was released specifically during the press, which was really cool, by them and Brad Miska. Um, and yeah, we've just once again, it's about these relationships. It's about like people being aware of the stuff and liking it, and being part of the horror community, with that kind of thing. Because with a lot of distribution, like, we did the whole tiered VOD thing as well, because we had a
Mhm.
limited theatrical release, which was crazy, and it was international as well. Like, we
Mhm.
actually had a pretty big opening in Pakistan, of all places, which was crazy. Like, we got released at the same time as, like, was it Deliver Us from Evil, or so, the one with the nun that gets possessed or whatever, is fighting
Oh, yeah, yeah,
demons.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then like I think it was Black Adam as well. They all
Mm.
came out at the same time, and we're like hang on, my cat is trying to get back through. um but like, if you look on my Instagram, you'll see like the ad they did where they cut Sinphony and like Deliver Us from Evil, or whatever it was
Mhm.
called, like together, and it's just presented as like, these are the films that are coming out this weekend. It was pretty cool.
One of the films I worked on before we started Mutiny, um, got bumped because of an Avengers release
Yeah.
from some theaters. So it's not exactly the same here because we were never cut in line with them. I would be so incredibly happy.
Yeah.
But it's I applaud you and all of that, I guess is where I'm going. What else are you working on besides Sinphony?
Yeah, so I have God, several features now that I'm working on currently. I also have a couple more shorts that I've written that there may be another anthology that I've been invited to be a part of, but I don't know the specifics about that yet in terms of when that's going to be happening. But that's another really exciting one, and I really love
Mhm.
those two shorts, so it'd be really fun to get to do that.
Nice.
But mostly it's features. Some of them are animated and some of them are live action, because of my background.
Mhm.
Um, and I've just been writing up a storm, with the strikes going on, obviously, it's just the best time to create new IP,
Yeah, it's
in our little caves, just writing up a storm, developing stuff, so that once it ends, I can go full out.
yeah, so we're definitely going to go more into the IP and your background because there's some really interesting stuff there. as well as a very interesting discussion to be had around development in general, because you and I have been through that road.
We have.
But before we do, since this is a podcast primarily for filmmakers, if somebody listening here intends to create an anthology, what would your advice be as somebody who participated in an unusually successful one?
So it's interesting. I've done a lot of research on this too.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day, like in the time of Tales from the Crypt, or like Tales from the Dark Side, the movie,
Mm-hmm.
or like, Twilight Zone, they used to be prestige films, these anthologies
Mm-hmm.
that had like major stars in them, or like Cat's Eye, the Stephen King
Mm-hmm.
one. And like Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, had all the top stars of the time, like, in the film. You
Mm-hmm.
got Steve Buscemi, you got like all these guys in there. And what's happened now is that anthologies have kind of been relegated to this like super indie, low budget, no stars territory. And I feel like, if I was putting one together and I had a proper budget for it, I would
Mm-hmm.
definitely get some faces in there. And I think that would make a difference on the distribution side, um, especially if you do it strategically, or like, even like Trick or Treat, had some
Mm-hmm.
really well-known faces in it as well. But now it's more like the VHS era, and like, which, I love the VHS
Mm-hmm.
um films. I think they're amazing. I think it allows filmmakers to experiment with horror and like do really interesting things. The Sewer Drain one in '94, the Ratma one, is probably one of my favorite ones ever. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also that cult one from VHS 2 that's like insane. Like they just do
Mm-hmm.
like insane things. Um, so, but that's become a brand, right? So they can release a VHS film and they pretty much know what they're going to make from it. Shutter kind of
Mm-hmm.
handles it to some extent, but they also have like a limited theatrical or whatever they do with it. Or at least a festival run.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it can be tricky. We ran into some problems, like domestically, we did really well
Mm-hmm.
with our anthology. Internationally, it was tougher. Some of the regions just, they weren't into a horror anthology, or at least not ours. Because once again, it didn't have like big names in it or anything like that. But mostly ours did well in terms of like the Halloween thing. I think helped a lot, because it's like with Cobweb. Did you see that movie? It just came out recently.
No, I didn't.
Okay, it's the perfect, like from a creepy like Halloween standpoint, it's the
Mm-hmm.
perfect Halloween film, and it was released in like July or August, and it's like, this thing probably would have killed it at Halloween, just because people want to go watch a creepy movie for Halloween.
I mean,
But it happens.
yeah, the issue with the October releasing for Halloween films and horror films is just how saturated the market becomes, and how basically
They
every
say that, Ben, but I'll tell you
yeah,
something. We wouldn't have gotten half the press we
I know.
got in a different time of year. We would have been a non-issue. But because it was Halloween when we were released, and like I said, they're like the top 11 films that you want to see, and it was
Mm-hmm.
like next to the menu and all these other like major, like Pale Blue Eyes with
Mm-hmm.
Christian Bale, like they were major films, and us, that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't Halloween, you know. So at
Fair
least for a
enough.
horror anthology, I'd say, and or if the anthology has to do with other like times of year, like different holidays or whatever, I would go all in on having it, because most headlines and most articles that they're doing, they're
Mm-hmm.
topical for the time of year. So, and there's so many outlets now, so even
Yeah,
though it's saturated, I guess also you got to have a good PR firm as well, and
that's a very
like a
good point. And
good
if
rep.
you're getting the sort of marquee placement that you're getting, you're right. It is absolutely not too saturated for your film in particular. The issue is just the massive amount of horror films that are released, it's easy to get lost in that.
The other thing we had was the story of the origin of it on Clubhouse, and that was a huge selling point where people wanted to know about that, and they wanted to and the whole Clubhouse thing was a new thing at that time. And it's huge, like I have filmmaking friends and collaborators around the world now because of Clubhouse. That didn't exist before. I know more people in LA than I do in San Francisco, where I live now, because of Clubhouse. And just the access you get to these amazing people who are established was incredible. And Clubhouse doesn't really work like traditional social media platforms either, like on Twitter, or I guess now X, and all these other ones. They try to get as many followers as possible, or however people do it. With Clubhouse, I've found that like you can do a lot more in a regular room of like 6 to 12 people. You can actually get, I mean, first of all, we're just great friends and we talk all the time, pretty much every day. But like, and it's about building these relationships. It's not going in and being like, how can you help me with my career? Like that doesn't work. People get really turned off by that. But if you actually get to know people, and then you're like, oh, you want to do something? Oh, what are you working on? Oh, okay. Do you need help? Or, oh, can you help me? And eventually people come to you, you go to them. But it's building these relationships that go pretty deep. I mean, when we saw each other for the first time in person in San Diego at Comic-Con, it was like a family reunion, because we had been talking to each other for like over a year, constantly. And it was the first time. And what was crazy is, so we had, I think, 30 to 40 people show up at Comic-Con from that we knew from Clubhouse. And then, like I said, at the screening, it was like 80 to 100 people that we had met through Clubhouse. And it was one of the first time people were even meeting in person again, at that time. It's crazy.
I mean, Clubhouse, at least in its heyday, was an extraordinarily powerful networking tool. And you're right, you had to be there from the perspective of, let me share knowledge, let me learn, let me be a part of this community, not how can this community help me further my goals. If you started with the latter on that, you were out super quickly. If you started with the intent to build the community, there was a gigantic opportunity there. I think that has waned in the past couple years, but
it's waned in the more broad general sense. But what's funny is like the communities that did form on there are still meeting. They just have private rooms now. They're not entirely. Like the big, they're not the big open rooms, because it just gets so messy in those rooms sometimes. You have like people that are like scammers. You got people that are just, liars. There's people that are trying to manipulate people and do weird stuff. So
it's just like the standard film industry now. Whereas before it was actually building artistic communities. But no, no, I agree. And also a good number, I don't know offhand exactly how many, but a good number of people on this podcast I met on Clubhouse, and we developed relationships out of that. So it's I think it used to be an amazing platform, and I just think the community involvement has shifted. But
I mean, there was a crossroads where I think like maybe it could have gone larger, but it definitely ended up kind of like shrinking back down into a more intimate thing. And then, Twitter's kind of got their own version of it now. I think Instagram has their own version of it.
I know Spotify did for a little bit. Nobody else really got the traction that Clubhouse got, though.
No.
And they all also tried to copy it, and then it just really killed it because it decentralized the community.
Yeah, so. And the quality, from what I've heard, especially from some of my friends that are musicians, because musicians will use Clubhouse to just like jam and stuff, or play music, and people go and hang out. There's also rooms where people just go and meet up, and they all write in silence in it, so they're not even talking to each other. They're just there together working.
Accountability.
And it's like they're called writers' sprints or something. because there's also an amazing, like, we have our filmmaking and horror sections of Clubhouse, but there's also an amazing whole portion of it that are like novelists and writers on that end. A lot of them are led by our friend Mandy Roth, who's an amazing self-published. She's like a self-publishing machine that just pumps out so much work. Most of the time when we're talking to her, she's like working on like 1 or 2 novels. It's insane. She's a anytime we think we're doing a lot of work, we talk to Mandy, and then that gets us to get back to work immediately. She's just so
That's
prolific.
yeah, I understand. I mean, like, Yvette Vargas was on an early episode of this podcast, and she runs the New Hollywood rooms on Clubhouse still, and they're still kicking. They're like really good. So definitely check all of those out. If you guys haven't checked out Clubhouse, just because you missed the maybe golden age, we're still in a silver age. It's not a bad place to be.
Yeah, I mean, one good room that still happens pretty regularly is one called Plot Points. I think it's usually on Tuesday nights. I think it might just be once a month now. But that one was started by my friend David McInerney. And it's got like lit reps and like industry people in there talking about real stuff. A lot the topic a lot of the time now is the strike, or the strikes, and where everything's at with that. So if you want to find out about that stuff, that's a good one to check out.
No. So we'll at least put a couple of those links in the description down here. I don't know how many, but at least a few. Cool. So moving on to development. I didn't actually ask this in pre-roll. How's everything going with ZTV these days?
I mean, ZTV, it was such an amazing experience, working with my producer Marissa Gray on that. It was like, originally it was going to be a feature, and then I ended up doing this short that's almost like also a pitch for a pilot for a series. And then I also did a comic book, like the first issue of a comic book that we actually brought to festivals, and I would leave stacks of the comic, and I did get meetings based on the comic alone, which was pretty cool. But yeah, and then I was rep by Mutiny for a while for that, which was very cool, getting to work with you and Colleen. But yeah, I mean, currently, basically where we got to with it, I remember Colleen had talked to Netflix, and they're basically like, "You're not Zack Snyder," because like his zombie thing had just come out, Army of the Dead, and I was like, "Yes, I know I'm not," because it's a massive thing, right? Like someday, and I knew too, if we were to sell it around then, I probably wouldn't even be involved in it, right? They'd give it to someone much bigger to do. So I think ultimately everything will work out the way it needs to. Like we had talked about before, I was like, whether it sells now or later, like it'll be a thing. It's just like, what's cool about it is with the things I have going on now, if this stuff happens first, then I'll be in a better position to actually be a key creative in it when it's made, as opposed to just having created it and it being sold off.
No, I completely agree. I mean, Stimson has been on this podcast. I believe you know him as well, or maybe not.
So, yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Stimson Sneed, director of Tim Travers. Part of the reason he did Tim Travers was specifically so that when it came back to doing, when it came back around to doing the other IP we were working on that is still under litigation, so I can't talk about it too much, or the other IPs we've together optioned on all of that, we wanted to be able to keep him in the director's chair because we had an offer to sell it to one of the major studios as a TV project, but he would have been ousted and he would barely have gotten what he had already put into it between everything.
Yeah,
and we just decided not to. And unfortunately, it has been a long slog since then. But I think a lot of that's going to change when Tim Travers comes out, just because he'll have directed a 7-figure feature.
Yeah, which
And
is amazing. You know,
yeah, that makes a
that and
gigantic difference.
that in and of itself is a pretty rarefied air, strangely. You know,
Yeah.
so yeah, like, and that's the thing is like the stuff I'm working on now ranges from like, you know, a feature that could be done for like, you know, maybe 500K to like all the way up to like a $20 million film. So
Hmm.
yeah, it's like really exciting. I'm working with some really amazing established people
Hmm.
on multiple projects, and yeah, I just, you know, I just get so excited. Like recently, for a while, I was working as the editorial manager at Halon Entertainment, which
Hmm.
is a visualization, virtual production, and finals animation company in Santa Monica. So I was working remotely there, and that was a great experience working with a lot of amazing people. And I got to work on some cool films, like a little bit on John Wick 4 and like Aquaman 2 and stuff like that. Um, in Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2, which was one of my
That's
favorite parts of my job at the time. Very extraordinary. As a huge lover of those films, that
oh
was
yeah.
like is like one of those moments where it's like why you get into working on this stuff in the first place. Like that's how much fun it was. Um, but you know, since then, because of the strikes, you know, all the visualization work on the film side dried up, and there were layoffs, of course, because there have to be.
Hmm.
And I was laid off a couple weeks ago. But the development stuff that I'm doing now and the projects I'm working on, there's so much to do that like it actually happened at exactly the right time for me, because I'm still my day. I think I work longer days now than I did when I was working at Halon, which was crazy because I was doing full time there and working on my projects, and now
Hmm.
it's just the projects. So
I mean,
pretty crazy.
those can your own projects can really eat your time. Speaking from experience,
Well,
it's yeah.
because you know, I think what it is, you know, I try to like break it all. I've been doing this for like 24 years now, so
Hmm.
it's like I have a system and I know what to work on, because it will actually, because you know how it is, like you could work on the wrong things
Hmm.
that aren't going to further anything. It's
Hmm.
very easy to get lost in development. But now it's like I'll, you know, do a treatment and then be waiting on notes from a friend or something, and then I'll just be working on something else, or you
Hmm.
know, I'll be doing design stuff. I do a lot of pitch decks. Companies actually hire me to do them.
Hmm.
um you know, and then like I'm doing storyboards for a film right now. um so I have like freelance work as well, so yeah, it's just because I also have to make money, so you know, it's that kind of thing, because with development the money doesn't happen too quickly, especially during the strike. So it's like you know, you got to be strategic about what you do as far as each little part of it.
Yeah, development is a tricky beast, and it's when the money actually comes in, it is, especially if you're working on like big films or series sorts of things, it's probably some of the most reliable long-term revenue you can have, but until you get that point, it's anything but.
Yeah.
And you've only got like a 1% chance of success of
Well,
getting
and
to
this
that
is
point.
why I think the studios have underestimated the WGA in terms of their ability to stick with the strike, because they don't understand how long these folks have gone without a paycheck before. You know, they have no idea, I don't think, of what it's like to be a writer in Hollywood, especially getting to that point. You know, if they think that they can wait them out, I think they might be wrong. Because
No, look, I think they are wrong. I don't think, I mean, first of all, it's absolutely absurd that there are many head writers on TV series that 5 months after the series is done filming, they're driving Lyft because they
yeah,
just don't have any money left.
that's insane. Yeah,
It's absolutely idiotic.
yeah.
And I really don't think this should turn into another strike episode because I've done a few of them already, but because solidarity. But I do think that ground will be covered on anything we could say now. It'll be old news by the
Yeah.
time this drops. So that's the only reason I'm not exploring this more. filmmakers in the audience. But yeah, I think that since I kind of went on a tangent anyway, what's your favorite Mission Impossible movie?
Oh, it's definitely Rogue Nation. It's the one that introduces Rebecca Ferguson's character. I think that she was such a great addition. Like she just like was a jolt of like just life like shot into that whole series, you know.
Oh yeah,
Um yeah.
it
That was really
was
good. Yeah.
Rogue Nation was up there. Actually, part of the reason I rediscovered Mission Impossible is I don't sleep well on planes,
Okay.
and I had a red eye from Philadelphia to Atlanta because American Airlines to Nice,
Oh wow.
which is a long flight.
Nice is amazing too. I've been there. I love that place.
Yeah, it was for con this
Right.
year, so it's a but and it was only after that that Americans started doing direct flights from Philly, and I was very annoyed. But the I watched um the fourth one and the fifth one
Right.
on the plane. And when I got back, I bought the Blu-rays and watched through all of them again.
Yep.
And I think Rogue Nation was actually the one I watched first, and it's what kind of really got me back into the series as a whole. And I
Yeah.
think my favorite is kind of extreme waffles by the day on Rogue Nation and Ghost Protocol.
Ghost Protocol is the fourth one, yeah.
That's the fourth one. Sorry, I meant the sixth
Yeah.
one.
So yeah, Ghost Protocol I think was the fourth one. That one was directed by Brad
right.
Bird, and then
Yeah.
Christopher McQuarrie came on with Rogue Nation, and then I think he went Rogue Nation and then Fallout. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right. It's Fallout. Sorry,
Fallout's great too.
Yeah.
I had to study that one a lot when we were working on Dead Reckoning, and I think I watched it like 20 times or so, and like with commentary and stuff. So I got a real appreciation for it. There's a lot going on in that movie. It's really intense. Yeah.
It's a dense movie, and I did not give it enough credit when I watched it in theaters the first time. I also really kind of hated the third one. We are so off topic. We should get
That's
off
funny because I really love the third one.
I hated it at first, and then I watched it again, and I really, really liked it.
Philip Seymour Hoffman's a great villain. Well, also you got to remember, like this is after John Woo did the second one, which kind of like it just kind of ended the series for a while because of all the. And look, John Woo's an amazing filmmaker. He's made some of my favorite films, but this particular Mission Impossible film, it was a lot of like slow motion on motorcycles and doves rising up and stuff. It was very. It just wasn't very Mission Impossible, you know. It was interesting. So
it wasn't. And also, the entire plot, if you really stop and think about it for more than like 10 minutes, it makes no sense because there's just no time to manufacture that pharmaceutical without being assumed that you knew about it.
And it's a sharp contrast to the first one, which is Brian De Palma, which is all plot, you know, and very complex. So it's really interesting the permutations that it's taken, you know, over the years and how, you know, it really did kind of find its way to Christopher McQuarrie and where it's at now. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see when part 2 comes out.
No, it's going to be, I still haven't seen the part 1 of Dead Reckoning, but I need to. It's a, so the other thing about Fallout is it has Caspar Philipson in it at the beginning, and I like Caspar Philipson a lot. Part of it is probably bias in that I have worked on 2 movies he's been in, so there's always a little bit of that. But it's a he's a very talented and underrated actor, even
100%.
If half the time he plays John F. Kennedy. But it's just yeah, he's a great actor. So one thing I've noticed about all of the horror filmmakers I've worked with is that at least the ones I've met have pretty much universally been some of the nicest, most soft-spoken people I know, as opposed to the I guess closet serial killers we all kind of expect horror filmmakers to be. How do you feel about that observation? Is that
It's been my experience, I
yeah.
think we horror filmmakers keep our demons out in the open and we're friends with them. So
Mhm.
we're not going to surprise you, hopefully, with anything too horrific, you know. But
That's
yeah, I mean, a lot of the nicest people I know are like horror people. Uh, yeah, and it's crazy because like it runs the gambit from like there's so many really dark, twisted, scary movies out there, but that's the job of the film. It's not
mhm.
who the person who made it is necessarily, I guess.
No, totally. It's a little like assuming that all actors are their most famous roles to a
Yeah,
degree. It's generally not true.
yeah.
Um,
They can be very different than how you think they're going to be based on their public personas. Um, it's just crazy. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
It's like how they always say like people that play villains are like the nicest people, in person or
yeah.
whatever.
I mean, like, apparently Tom Hiddleston is just one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, even though Loki has become a significantly more sympathetic
Become
villain.
more of an anti-hero or
Yeah,
heroic in his series, which is amazing. I love that show so much.
that's a
And
good one.
and
I'm looking forward to the second season.
yeah, and
But
Tom
yeah.
Hiddleston is just, like he's grown so like the character's grown so much since the first Thor.
Yeah.
Thank God. And yeah, he's just amazing as that character. Which is why I'm glad that no matter how many times he dies, there's another universe for him to exist in for us.
Entirely, especially when he's a gator. That was
Yes.
the
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 gator
gator
Loki.
Loki.
And the
Um,
Thor frog in the jar. That was hysterical.
I missed the Thor frog in the jar. I might need to
There's a
rewatch
part
it.
where they like move through through the ground down into the bunker or something, and you
Uh-huh.
see him like hopping in this jar that's been buried or something. I
That's
think
great.
uh I think Alligator Loki did that. He like captured him, and I don't know, maybe that might be a story that I'm adding to it, but yeah, that's what
That's
there's
a
an
that's a
issue of the
perfectly
comics.
understandable headcanon.
Yeah,
Um,
apparently that's from the comics. Like that's an actual thing. So yeah.
that's great. What are your favorite horror subgenres? Like creature features, slashers?
Yeah, definitely. Right now, I'm obsessed with slashers for sure,
Mhm.
and I'm working on one that I'm really excited about. Uh, that I wrote, and then that's kind of like this epic slasher.
Mhm.
It's kind of like Scream meets Saw kind of thing. It's
Ooh.
crazy. Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah. So that one, creature features for sure.
Mhm.
I'm obsessed with. Um, some of the ones that and then like there's just some that I'll just like are my go-tos that I'll keep just putting on the background. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I'd say creatures and slashers are probably my top ones. Although one of my favorite films from the last couple of years is Watcher, the one with Micah Monroe, which is
Okay.
more of like a thriller horror film kind of. Is just done really well.
Mhm.
I'm trying to think. And then, obviously I love Terrifier 2. That was amazing.
Mhm.
That's kind of like a creature slasher in a way. Although I guess more of a slasher. But yeah.
Mhm.
Trying to think what else.
I mean, I don't know if
Oh,
you
that's right. Talk to Me is one of my favorite new ones that
Okay.
just came out. I don't know if you've seen that one yet.
No, I
Um,
haven't. Honestly, so I've worked on a lot of horror movies, because if you work in independent film distribution, you kinda have to. And
good place to work. Yeah.
yes, and it's never been my go-to genre. I have a significantly greater appreciation for it than before I was in the biz, but it's still not what I reach for. I'm more of a action guy. Like I will I love terrible late 80s to early aughts action movies.
Those are
They are
great.
my
Yeah.
jam.
It's classic.
Um So I guess, would you consider zombie movies and vampire movies a subset of creature feature or just their own sort of thing?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, some vampire stuff could be creature feature type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But like,
Like the
for me,
Nosferatu version as opposed to the Dracula, I
I
guess, version.
mean, well, it's more like 30 Days of Night, for instance,
Got
is
it.
more of a creature feature, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like classic Dracula is a little more. I mean, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula is a creature feature because
Mm-hmm.
of the different creatures that Gary Oldman turns into in that, for sure. It's some of the best creature effects probably
Mm-hmm.
in most films. Um, or like, right now there's two amazing films on Netflix that have two of the greatest creatures I've seen in decades. One is called The Ritual, and the
Mm-hmm.
other one is called No One Gets Out Alive.
Mm-hmm.
And the VFX company that does um that does these creatures is unbelievable, and whoever's designing them is incredible. It's like totally unexpected and like not anything you've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually written a film working with one of my writing partners, Robert Archer, that I've kind of created as like a third one of those
Mm-hmm.
that's aimed at kind of Netflix that I'm hoping that we get to make. And I'm hoping we get those guys to make that our creature for that I've like written to be. I guess it's a much larger version of what they've done before, but that could be really cool. I love those films so much, and I've watched them many times.
That sounds, yeah. I mean, there's a surprising amount of variance in how well different horror subgenres sell. Like creature features in general are a lot easier to sell than slashers.
Yeah.
And I've been a little surprised at exactly how wide that gap is. Um, and it's important to know that stuff going in. I've been kind of brainstorming a blog on how different types sell, but might come out around the same time as this podcast. But while I have you, and before we go into the last three questions, um, you've developed a lot of intellectual property from your comics to shorts as part of an extended universe and all of this. Um, what advice would you give to filmmakers, both when it comes to developing your IP and actually doing something with it?
Interesting question. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess once you've developed enough of them, you
Mm-hmm.
stop wanting to develop them in a way where they wouldn't have something done with them. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think part of what I'd recommend is if people are starting out and they haven't done a lot of world building or IP creation, start small, you know, start
Mm-hmm.
very small. One of the mistakes that a lot of us make when we first go into this is we think we need to make it this massive thing, you know what I mean? That's like, and we're trying to do more than like a massive blockbuster would do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like planning out like 10 films or something. It's like, even on those big films, they just focus on the first one first, and
Mm-hmm.
then if that is successful, they go further. So like start with a 2 minute short, or like something that's a good pitch, like Lights Out, for instance. There was
Mm-hmm.
that classic story of that short. Jed Shepard, who I know, and Rob Savage, they had like they did a short of Host before they had done Host as a proof of concept. That's amazing, of them just on a Zoom,
Mm-hmm.
and like somebody goes up to an attic and this like thing happens. Or like they have their short film Salt, or
Mm-hmm.
Alex Neuer did um he did The Conductor, which is a short film that you can find online that then became the feature Sound of Violence,
Mm-hmm.
with Jasmine Savoy Brown from Yellow Jackets and Scream. And he's currently working on a new feature right now, called Love is the Monster, I think, which I'm really looking forward to. But you know, and that's the thing is like Jed and Alex actually used to have a room in Clubhouse called Shorts to Features that was like a weekly thing that the horror community would go to. Unfortunately, it doesn't really exist anymore. But you know, that's an amazing way to develop IP if you don't have like a ton of money, you know, because you could do a short for like anywhere from like $500 to $10,000 depending on what you have. But like some of the ones that are the most successful cost almost nothing. Like Lights Out, I think that particular filmmaker probably either had a friend that did VFX or they did them themselves, and they did that one kind of distortion thing or with the face of the person. But the rest of it is very simple video, like a decent video camera in a house, you know. It's not crazy. And recently on Twitter or X, Jed actually posted a picture of the rig they used for host, and it's like an iPhone like taped to the back of a laptop, you know, with like a little thing, you know, and so, you know, like you can do things on your, you know, you can shoot on your phone now. Like the phone does, like the iPhone does like 4K Dolby Vision natively.
So yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is if you're developing IP, the most important thing to do is get started and make
Yeah, but like
something.
in a concentrated way. Like the first thing I'd say is like watch a bunch of shorts or films in the genre you want to work in. Like for horror, one of the go-tos is Alter on YouTube. I don't know if people know about that, but like it's a massive collection of all of these really great solid horror shorts, and it's one of the places that a lot of people, I know I've done it plenty of times, where you just kind of get your head dialed in by just watching like a ton of them. And you know, you have to understand, okay, so what is the core concept of this thing that would make people want to see more of it, where you'd get to do a feature from it, you know? Like people are selling stuff off of short stories on Reddit now. Like there's a whole run on this of these like, you know, there's so many different ways to get the stuff out there. But if you want to be a filmmaker, as we discussed earlier, like you need to actually make a film and show it to people if you want to be able to make a larger film or more films. So yeah, I mean that's the thing. And don't be afraid to team up with people, you know, and be creative with people, collaborate with them. You know, if you try to do everything yourself, it can be exhausting, and it can be you will have some very tough days.
No, it's
You know.
very true. So you've also done a decent amount with comics, right?
I did my single issue of ZTV, and I've done samples of some of my other ones. I'm hoping to go larger with comics at some point. But you know, I think the main thing about comics is, you know, with ZTV, I wrote it, I illustrated it, I laid it out, I did everything myself, and it's this monumental thing. Like it's just there's no way of stating how much work that is. So ideally for an ongoing comic, you need a budget where you can pay a team of artists so that you're not, or at least for me, I'm not the only artist work. Like if I was just inking and like coloring the stuff in and laying it out and stuff, I could keep it going on a regular basis. But like doing everything from scratch is like, you know, because when you have a team for comics, you can be working on one thing while they're working on another, and it all and so like the month of work that it takes for everyone or whatever it is, or weeks, are overlapped so that you can do it each month or bi-monthly or something, you know.
That makes sense. So it's, I mean, and we don't want anybody to be working their comic teams as hard as manga workers are worked in Japan.
Well, those books are like this thick, you know. Those are
They
not,
are
that's not the
massively
same as
thick.
a comic book.
That is true. We don't have time to go into it here, but look up the labor disputes around
I'm sure. I
manga
mean,
writing. It's bad.
artists sadly are generally woefully underpaid. Even comic artists, like their rates are not like, they're so low for the amount of amazing artwork that they do.
Oh yeah.
that it's crazy, so anybody that wants to make comics, like, go find an artist, pay them well so that they want to keep working on it and do it.
Yeah.
But also, there is the distribution side of it too, though, where if you want to make any money from comics, you need to make sure that, like, I mean, the best thing out there is Image, if you can
Hmm.
get them interested, but they get a lot of pitches, so it's tough to get in there.
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, but I have a ton of stuff I want to do with comics. I just haven't had the time. And then, I've also done some stuff with some motion comics where I've actually brought the comic stuff that I do into film,
Hmm.
which has been people have responded really well to that. So I'm thinking about doing some stuff with that at some point as well. Especially after Shudder had done their this animated special that was basically a motion comic for 45
Yeah.
minutes and had like Kiefer Sutherland and all these amazing actors doing the voices and stuff.
Nice.
So I was like, hey, I've done that. I need to do more of that. So yeah,
Well, that
hoping
sounds
to do some
good.
of that. Yeah.
So we'll have to have you on again.
Cool. Anytime.
In about, yeah. To talk more about your comics once there's a little bit more there and just the other stuff you're doing because you're fun to talk to.
Oh,
But it's my podcast, so sometimes I get to make selfish calls like that. Now we're going to move on to the last three questions, which I ask of all my guests.
okay.
You can answer the first one second if you need a second to think. Just let me move on to get to the second one if you do need that second.
Okay.
So the first question, what are your top three favorite movies of all time as it stands right this second now? Can change in 10 minutes. It
Okay.
can change in 10 seconds. But
So
as it is now.
my favorite three of all time. That's tough because I have like hundreds of them. But
Mhm.
for now, especially since it's Halloween, I will go with Nightbreed, The Devils, and Cemetery Man.
All new ones and also very quick. Nice work.
Yes.
Cool. So then the second question, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that advice be and when would you give it?
So when I did ZTV, I originally wrote a feature, and it was a found footage style feature. And if I had known how much money I was going to spend on the short, I would have told myself to just make the feature because I could have done it with the amount of money I spent. The problem was I got it in like $5,000 and $10,000 chunks,
Mm-hmm.
and not all at once. If I got it all at once, I could have easily made a feature. And making a feature is here's the thing. Earlier we were talking about making shorts to make features.
Mm-hmm.
That's great if all you have is the money to make a short, but if you can just make the feature, that's way better.
Oh,
And
entirely.
it's a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah,
And to your career and everything else, like it can mean years, if not decades, in terms of furthering your career. So yeah, that would be the one bit.
that
And
is
exactly when.
that is good advice. Really, it's a look. I get the question about how to distribute shorts or how to find a distributor who will sell shorts, and the answer is you don't. There
Well, unless
are.
you win an Academy Award or you're up for one, yeah. That's because
I've
you
had
get
trouble
those.
with that. I have literally been.
Really?
Yeah, no. There was one last year. I don't want to say which one because it was kind of a handshake thing, but there was one that was nominated,
Wow.
and I still couldn't get distribution for it.
Yeah,
Which
well,
was
they used to do those collections, right? Where they would
yeah,
release them, but maybe they don't do those anymore. I don't know.
they do, but it's a slightly different model. It's
Okay.
like basic. I think they license them from the Academy directly, even, or
Yeah.
there's a direct thing allowing it, but there's no like long term, and it's normally just theatrical exhibition or extremely short exhibition on a platform.
Yeah.
Whereas this would be like an actual license, and you can't. It's hard,
Yeah.
basically. It's but even with that Academy Award thing, it's not a shoe-in, which is the point. So yeah, it's a interesting notion, and yeah, maybe I'll have that guy on. That'd be fun. The So the final question, and frankly, the hardest of all of them. Where can people find you, and what are you looking for from anybody who might be listening?
Yeah, so generally a good place to follow me is on Instagram. That you can see all the stuff I'm doing. You can see all the art stuff because I do illustrated posters and like custom posters for stuff, and then there's all my writing exploits and then the filmmaking stuff. So that's a good place to kind of follow me. And you can DM me or whatever on Instagram. People do that. And then basically what I'm looking for, I mean, I'm just looking for all I need at this point is funds. Like everything else is pretty much set. We like Marissa and I, my producer, we have teams of crew and people ready to go. We have stacks of scripts. One of my favorite ones, this one that I wrote called Lucy's Game, is just 3 actors in a house. We could do it for so little, or it could be done at like an A24 level with like 3 amazing actors, you know, because it's kind of like this game of chess kind of thing. And then I have stuff like that all the way up to like the feature that I wrote based on my Sinphony short, which opens up a whole universe of IP and like a franchise, you know, if I ever get to make that, where it could go from like the first one's more of like, you know, it's more like in our time and like more reasonable, even though it's still pretty extravagant, I guess, by indie standards. But then it opens up into the past. It's almost like Willow or like Harry Potter or something. It's crazy. So, you know, long term on that. That's the thing is my brain goes really big and complex. So eventually I'll probably be doing like big franchise stuff, but like getting there, like bridging that gap, as you've seen from ZTV, right? It's like bridging the gap between being an indie filmmaker and that is going to be the tricky thing for me. But I think with the stuff I'm working on right now and where it could land, it may be not too far off that I start to get to do stuff, which would be fun.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Jason. It's always good.
Thank you, Ben. This is fun. It was good catching up with you.
It is. And we will have you back on in the future. For everybody listening, thank you as well. Please, if you liked it, hit like. If you didn't, hit dislike. Say your favorite type of horror movie in the comments, creature features, whatever. And smash that notification bell if you're on YouTube. If you're listening anywhere else, hit the auto download button, like and subscribe, and grab my free film business resource pack for a deck, monthly blog, monthly content digests, and free ebook, white paper, and a whole lot more. Thanks very much, and see you next week.